Hola chicos y chicas, in this video we are going to talk about the differences between ser and estar. And you already know some of the information about the verb ser and estar, like how to conjugate it. You already know some of the uses of ser and estar, but there's a lot more to it. One thing that you'll find is that it's really more of a vocabulary thing than anything else, not so much grammar, because all we need to do is look at the sentence to decide what kind of information is the sentence giving us in order to decide, am I going to use ser or estar? And we'll have some helpful tips that should help you to know what the rules are for ser and what they are for estar. So let's talk about what you guys already know about these two verbs. Starting with ser. Okay, what do I use ser for? We already know that we use ser for description, like la clase es fácil. Okay, for the class is easy. We also use it for relationships, like when I talk about who's in my family, like ellos son mis primos. Or I think that says padres. Sorry. And then we also use it for telling time, like saying es la una de la mañana. It is 1 o'clock in the morning. You should already know your forms of ser, but just in case you forgot, soy, eres, es, somos, soy, son. Those are my forms. Now, for estar, the things that you already know is that you use estar to talk about feelings and location. For feelings, saying things like yo estoy contenta. Okay, for location, saying things like la sala está al lado del comedor. That's one thing that we'll be using a lot in this chapter because we're talking about the rooms in the house. And then you have your forms of estar, which you should already know. Make sure you're knowing where the accent marks belong. And if you remember the song from last year, that could be helpful for helping you remember those forms of estar. So in order to get into the differences between these two verbs and the specifics, we need to have an acronym. We have an acronym for each of our verbs that helps us to remember what the different rules are for when we use ser and when we use estar. So we're going to start with estar, and you should have a worksheet that goes along with this that you should be filling in with this information. So for estar, the acronym that we want to remember is place, and the letters in place stand for position, location, action, condition, and emotion. And I'll talk about what each of these things is and give you an example of it in just a second. But for estar, the acronym is place. That's what we need to remember. Okay, so for each of these, let's talk about what they mean. So for position, okay, position expresses the physical position or posture of a person or thing, like estoy sentado, which means I am sitting, okay, and I know it kind of got erased on there, but that's what that means. And so that's kind of like if you're slouched over, if you're standing up straight, that's what position is. Location expresses where places, people, or things are located, like estoy en mi casa, I am at my house, or el libro está encima de la mesa. Note that we also use this for when we talk about where a place is located, like if I was going to say San Luis está en Missouri, okay? All right, for action talks about, hold on just a sec. Okay. All right, so action expresses the result of an action or the progressive. And we'll talk more about what the present progressive is in class, but basically it's saying what you are doing right now. And that's represented by the endings ando, yendo, or yendo. So if you see those, then you know you should be using estar. Like an example would be estoy hablando, which means I am talking. Okay. Condition talks about health or other changeable states. Okay, so things that can change, like estoy enferma, for I am sick, or la sala está sucia, for the living room is dirty. It's something that can change. I'm sick and then I get better, the room's dirty and then I clean it, and it can easily change. Ser is for things that are more permanent, estar is for things that can readily change. The last letter, E, in our acronym for emotion, talks about how someone feels. This is probably one of the areas where you have the most practice with estar. Like mi amiga está triste, for my friend is sad. Now the thing you want to remember, like I said, is that estar is used for things that can readily change, which means they're not necessarily considered to be very permanent. They can quickly change from one thing to the next, whereas for ser, it's things that are not readily changeable, which means although they may change over time, they can't change in an instant, like something being dirty or clean, or sitting here and then sitting over there. So let's talk about the acronym that we use for ser. And for ser, the acronym that we want to remember is didactor. Okay, yes, it has two D's at the beginning because I needed two D's, and I think that didactor sounds cooler than Dr. D. All right, so the letters in didactor need a little bit less explanation than for place. They stand for date, description, occupation, characteristic, time, origin or heritage, and relationship. So let's talk about what each of these means. Date, I use to talk about the date, okay? It could be the day of the week or the actual date, like hoy es lunes, es el 22 de abril. Description is when we want to describe what something looks like, okay? So physical description, like nosotros somos bajos, okay? That would be a physical description, or yo soy bonita, or something like that. Occupation talks about what someone does for a living, like mi madre es policía, or señora Miller es una maestra. Characteristic is a description of someone's personality, like tú eres simpática. Okay, so that's different from description in that it's something that you can't necessarily see when you look at someone. The T stands for time, okay, so when I'm telling what time it is, like son las 2 de la tarde. Origin or heritage talks about where you're from, or like your cultural background. It could also include what religion you practice. So an example of that you guys already know how to do would be Maria es de Brasil, okay, or if you were going to say something like I am Irish, or I am German, or something like that, then you would use ser. And finally, we use it to talk about relationship, like ellos son mis primos. Okay, so again, these are things that cannot readily change, okay? They're not things that can change quickly normally, okay? You can't ever change where you're from. The date is going to stay that date for at least 24 hours, stuff like that. So estar is something that is less permanent, that can readily change, and ser is something that cannot readily change. Finally, the thing that you can use to help you try to remember is the little rhyme for how you feel and where you are. Always use the verb estar, and for who you are and where you're from, then you use the other one, and that's ser. So that pretty much concludes the notes taking portion of this video. If you have any questions, remember you can always email me, and I'll see you soon. Adios.